Hello friends of YouTube, welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today we are discussing The Hostage by Zayd, Muteé, Dammaj for the country of Yemen. Sorry about the pronunciation, as usual. Now, I don't know much about Yemen. I still don't know much about Yemen. All I know is that in this book, it takes place during the 1940s, even though it was first published in 1984 in Arabic in the country of Beirut, not the original country where the author is from. The action of the book, the story, takes place in the 1940s in pre-revolution Yemen, whatever that means. At this time, Yemen is controlled by imams, which I take to be, I think that means Islamic religious leaders, but please correct me if I'm wrong. We view so I'm not really sure who's in charge, but there is clearly some kind of like stirrings of revolution and rebellion going on in the country in the backdrop of this novel, including the narrator's father. Now, that leads to how the story starts. The narrator is a young boy who is first taken to a prison, a fortress, to ensure his father's political loyalty. And then as a way of getting out of this prison, he agrees to be what they call a duwaydar. So the duwaydars basically are servants who serve in the household of the governor, specifically attending to the governor and the females, the women of the household. And they sort of take the place of what the eunuchs served as in like the Ottoman Empire in previous, I guess, I don't know who exactly, but there's a mention early in the story that, it was the eunuchs. They'd chop off their, the guy's you-know-whats, and then they wouldn't be able to have any sexual relationships with the women of the palace and could serve them without fear of anything like that happening. But, apparently in this book, times have moved on and eunuchs are no longer a thing, but there are still, young boys who are being brought from rural areas to serve in this role without actually, I guess, any body modifications, so to speak. So anyway, that was a long story, but the narrator is basically going to the palace. He meets another duwaydar, and they become kind of best friends. And this best friend, I don't even think either of these two are given a name. If they are, it was either mentioned so little that it just wasn't like important. You have the narrator and his best friend, the handsome duwaydar, and you have the governor's beautiful sister. Those are like the three main characters, really. So you have this best friend, and the best friend's kind of showing him the ropes, and quickly the narrator's understanding that like part of their unofficial job is to please the women of the household in whatever way they want. And this is a little weird because, like I said, these are young boys of undetermined age. The narrator doesn't even know how old he is because he's from a rural area, and they don't, write their name they don't write the date of their birth in a Quran like is customary for the urban or the more civilized, quote unquote, people of Yemen at this time. And instead, his father and his parents only told the time by the seasons, and just he has no idea how old he is. So, he's just from this rural tribal area, and his father is apparently involved in some kind of revolution, is a freedom fighter of some sort. This is going on in the background. The boy thinks often of his mother, and in some ways, I almost feel like he is relating his, there's almost something like, maybe it's weird to say Freudian because seems like it's so far outside the culture of Freud. But it seems like often he thinks there's this phrase where he's thinking of his mother, and then also having these feelings for the governor's beautiful sister, and there's a sort of weird connection there. And the governor's beautiful sister, she is definitely coming on to him and always referring to how she's trying to make him a man. She wants him to become a man. And there's this sort of sensual, romantic tension between them throughout the whole story. And so, I mean, without spoiling the book, you kind of have to read it to find out where that goes and what it is. So yeah, you have to get over the cultural strangeness of, what we would consider a totally inappropriate and illegal relationship in most modern states today. But it is part of the story, and I'm assuming that it's part of things that actually happened in Yemen at this time, or else I don't know why he'd be writing about it. I did get a very strong sense just from this short novella. Like, it's not long. It's the actual novella parts maybe 130 pages in fairly large size font. So it's one you can get through fairly quickly. And but I did get a sense of, like, even though it seems like it would have an oppressive feel, being called the hostage and being about, yeah, at some points in the novel, literally chained up, being forced to serve the women of this household. And but at the same time, the young boy and his best friend seem to have a lot of agency. They talk back to the women. They talk back to those who are giving them orders without a whole lot of repercussions. Um, and there's even a great part in the middle of the novel. I suppose this is kind of a spoiler, a mild spoiler. So read the book if leave and read the book if that's what you want to do without spoilers. Where the narrator pushes what do they call him? The crown prince's illegitimate son, who's his favorite son, into a fountain, or like tips over his boat in a big fountain and gets him all wet and stuff because he was provoking him. And you would think, like, in these times, well, that could get you in really big trouble. But the governor's sister intervenes on his behalf. So most of the rebellious stuff that this young boy does throughout the book really doesn't have much repercussions. The book is really more about this relationship between the two. It was interesting. I got through it quickly. It was an easy read. I feel like there's more under the surface that I didn't grasp. Um, and the real sort of again, this gets into kind of a spoiler of the novel, but one of the real major decision of this novel for the narrator is to, like, let's put ourselves in his shoe, right? He is this hostage. He's forced to serve these women, but he falls in love with the governor's sister. And this is, of course, taboo. And she returns his love. But yet he has some very complicated feelings about this, as there's a revolution starting around them, and his father is almost certainly going to die in this revolution. He knows, and he doesn't know where his mother is. And this governor's sister kind of represents the class that his father is fighting and that he appears to sympathize with. So even while he's a hostage in this whole thing, there's kind of under the surface this sort of sympathizing with the revolution, with the rebellion. And there's a few other characters, like a religious leader and like an old veteran of war that tells some stories that seems to influence our narrator as well. I couldn't quite figure out the best friend. Like, the best friend was obviously a character that means a ton to the narrator, that means a ton to the governor's sister, to everybody in the story. And but it what his meaning was beyond being somebody that they all loved, I couldn't quite grasp. So that was an interesting aspect of the novella. So anyway, I was talking about what's the main conflict of this story. Imagine you're this hostage and you're in love with this woman who you're supposed to serve but can't be with, and she loves you back, and she, what do? What's your option? The only option they have possibly is to run away together. And imagine you're this hostage. What would you think? What would you do? That's the question. Would you run away with her, or would you run away alone? And that is kind of the that is the question at the end of the book. And I'm not sure I really figured out what's the deeper meaning to any of this. Um, But for me, the highlight of the novella was the atmosphere that it was able to build around the palace. There were a lot of scenes of like sitting in the room and by this kind of dirty room where the two duedars, the narrator and his best friend, would just sit and talk, and like looking out the window and seeing the starlight. This feeling of when the narrator goes out into the city, into the market, and feeling this, that from above, the first line of the novel, or the novella, is how beautiful this city was. And that's when he is looking at it from afar. But when he's actually down there in the market and he sees its dirtiness, he feels a sense of claustrophobia. He misses the rural, the mountain air of where he's from, and has a longing for that. And there's just a lot of sensations in this book like that, like really, really just evocative moments, quiet moments between this sort of main story, that main relationship uh, between the governor's sister and um, the narrator. And again, it's so strange. Okay, I've been calling her the governor's sister this whole time. Her name is Sharifa Hafsa, and she is, and that's really the only name that I was able to take out of this book. I don't actually know if any other character is named, which is strange, and I didn't even realize that until the end. There's just the crown prince, the governor, uh, the narrator, his best friend, the handsome Duedar. So, and everybody else is just referred to by their title. So very interesting that I didn't even think of that until talking about the book in this moment. The other interesting thing I wanted to bring up, there's a sort of humorous irony going on. Some of the humor of the book, I think, went over my head. Some of it, the way the characters talked to each other was very interesting. Like, in a way, you could tell it was a translation. This isn't saying like the translation's bad, but that you get the sense that they're talking to each other in another language in a way that doesn't translate exactly to English. Like, they talk around each other. And I don't know if this is a cultural thing or, intentional, supposed to be. Like, it made sense. Nothing about this was like, oh, it doesn't make sense. It's just that I noticed that conversations between the characters is they tend to not necessarily respond to what each other says directly, but sort of talk in a circle around each other. I don't know how else to explain it. I'm sure I could find an example. You can, if you read the book, let me know if you know what I'm talking about so I don't feel crazy. uh, but yeah, the humorous moments of the book, there is a governor, there's a governor, well, the governor is putting on a big parade, and then the crown prince notices this, and there's a car, like an automobile, as part of the parade. That's the governor's son's automobile, and the crown prince looks at it and says, you're getting pretty, big for your britches. I don't know how I feel about all this. And he sends the poet. That's another interesting character in this book, is the poet, because the poet is another love interest. It is like a love interest of the governor's daughter, Sharifa, and also kind of makes some advances on our narrator. So he gets involved in this little. The poet makes up part of this like weird love triangle between the three of them. So mixed feelings on that. But and again, there's nothing overt in this book that I would call like graphic. That like any scenes that are like extremely uncomfortable. I'll say that just because of the nature of these relationships. There's just sort of like tense scenes where these things are insinuated, right? So I keep getting distracted. So back to the automobile. The crown prince is looking at this, sends the poet, and the poet gives this message to him and says, the crown prince doesn't really like this big show you're putting on. And so the governor says, oh, the automobile, right, that was actually a gift for the crown prince. It's not my son's, it's a gift for the crown prince. And then he pays the poet and all is well. So there's a little bit of like corruption and kind of the crown prince using his power to extort something from the governor that the governor also probably received by corrupt means. So that's just an example of the kind of a little bit of humor or irony that's under the surface in this book. That's all I really have to say about it. I mean, it's not like amazing. It's again, the major difficulty of it is getting over that sort of cultural barrier of the what's going on in the story, because it's just, it's probably reflecting something that was a reality in these times, and that's kind of like, again, part of reading the world and reading about past time periods. We get stuff like this that's hard for our modern sensibilities to digest. This is definitely one of those books, and hard to talk about because of that. So again, treat it for what it is. It's a book that you have to take it for its own context, and obviously take it for what it is. So that is The Hostage by Zayd Muteé Dammaj. Again, I won't say it's one of my favorite books. It was an easy read. It was one that I found interesting, taught me something. Again, more about what I don't know than what I do know, and more than anything gave me an impression of like what it was like, just impressions, right? Like scenery and just moments and I don't know, that indefinable something of a little bit of something of what it might have been like to be this person in this time period, a hostage boy, and in an opulent palace where you're being taken advantage of, and how does a boy in that scenario become a man? Maybe that's the question of the novel, because that is the question that Sharifa, with all her advances and the love that forms between them, is always telling him that be a man, become a man. But yeah, how does a hostage in this scenario, when this is all they've known, how does that person become a man? And perhaps the only way out is to flee, to run, and leave it all behind. And that's kind of what the end of the story is, I think, pondering. That's my best interpretation. So, thank you for watching. I hope the next book will finally be our book from Thailand. Still working my way through it. And the house plant of the week that I promised we were going to do is the Rex begonia. It is really liking the spot that I've got for it. It's a nice plant. It's the Inca Flame variety, and yeah, it's enjoying the spot under the lamp right here. So keep plants around. They're good for your mental health, and get lots of oxygen, you know, in the house, especially for like me here in the dead of winter. It's a great way to get through the winter where I live. So yeah, I don't know why I'm compelled. I really like houseplants right now. What can I say? We'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World. Thanks for watching, subscribing, commenting, liking, whatever you do. Take care.